how certain parts of Salesforce work and being able to decide for them how certain things should be done inside of our platform. So that really started to elevate my journey more towards architecture. From there, I moved on towards Cloud Sherpas, who were then bought out by Accenture. My role was, again, I would say senior developer, TA, looking after a large implementation for a financial services company in the UK. And my specific role was helping build out some key initiatives, ensuring they're architected in the right way, and leading a team of developers to make sure that it's being developed correctly as well. So that got me into the world of governance and understanding how to apply best practices across Salesforce implementation as well, and how it impacts the enterprise scale. After doing a few years in the consulting space, I then moved on and joined the mothership. So I joined Salesforce in 2016, arguably the best decision I think I've ever made. So worked there for 3 years, got really good support from notable kind of individuals at Salesforce to help me get through the CTA exam. Um, they had a very nice structured program, which definitely gave us a good stepping stone to move forward for that, to achieve that credential. So two roles I did at Salesforce, which I think lined me up nicely as well for CTA. One was as a technical architect, helping lead some of our programs of work for Heroku and community cloud-based solutions. And then I moved into the program architecture team towards the end of my stay, helping lead experience cloud initiatives as well in what I do, and taking a more of a governance focus in the role that I play at Salesforce. After a few years at Salesforce, once I passed my CTA, I got a chance to join VRP Consulting, who were looking to basically open up a consulting arm in the UK and Ireland. And this was a chance to kind of join them at a point where they were in their infancy, and not in terms of company, but in terms of growing as a consulting company. And they wanted somebody to head up their architecture arm. So I joined them, helped them establish architecture best practices and principles in the company, helped them shape how they run and govern their programs of work and how they do them from a technical perspective, and help them set themselves up nicely to then become a consulting arm and not just an outsourcing provider. So after 2 years at VRP, I was keen to get back into the enterprise space. So at that point, I joined IBM. I joined them as an enterprise architect, helping lead the COVID-19 vaccine program for Republic of Ireland. And after a year there, an opportunity came up. It is something I've always dreamt of doing, which is moving out to Asia and working in the ASEAN region and seeing how Salesforce is done over here. So when the chance came up, I couldn't say no. I joined here as region head and CTO, helping VRP build a presence in the ASEAN region. And that's what I'm doing today as well. So that's a bit about me. Just like something on the side. So maybe you guys have seen me on Netflix. So I was part of a cooking show. We did quite well. I won't say any more than that. But a show called The Big Family Cooking Showdown. So if you guys are Netflix viewers, if you search for BBC Big Family Cooking Showdown on Netflix, you'll definitely see me there and see another side of me as well. So it's something I thought I'd share. Cool. So for those who don't know, what is the CTA? So I look at it from this pyramid perspective. In my mind, it's the topmost credential in the Salesforce sphere. I think it's definitely the hardest one to get, and certainly one that requires the most effort, dedication, and experience to achieve that credential too. So it's split up into like initially two parts from a learning perspective. You want to achieve the application architect and system architect, which are achieved by obtaining the certifications which are listed in those particular streams. So that ensures that from an architectural point of view, you have a good understanding of those specific domains. A point that I'll say very importantly at this stage, because it's something I've come across a lot. It's fair enough to say you're application architect and system architect. I've come across a lot of people who have got both these credentials, but when you actually ask them about either real world experience or you ask them about how to do something basic from an integration perspective, sometimes they struggle. So what I would say is when you're studying for these qualifications, please don't treat this as a numbers game. See it as I want to learn about this domain really well, understand it fully, and then sit that exam. And the reason I say that is because if you really want to go forward towards CTA and want to obtain that credential, your depth of knowledge has to be strong. And it becomes very clear where candidates have got superficial knowledge in certain areas, but they haven't really grasped the context and the depth and how something really works. So my advice is if you're going on this journey and you're doing an application system architect and you have a vision to finally go for CTA, please go into depth in all of these domains which are there. It'll just make your life a lot easier when you start going towards review boards for the final CTA exam. So that's something which I would 100% recommend anybody to when they're going on this journey. Now, if you just take CTA out of this for a second, why should we, as people in our field, improve our architecture abilities? So these are the reasons that come to my mind first. So firstly, the customers are the heart of what we do, and we want to make sure that we're serving the customer in a better way. So if we are armed with more knowledge, we're therefore able to recommend the right and optimal solutions for a customer. Knowing how a platform works lets us challenge the customer as well to help better shape their requirements to kind of align better to what a Salesforce-based implementation can look like. We can then come to the table armed with deeper knowledge about certain areas and not be unsure. It allows us to lead an implementation and not just be like part of a team. We can be seen as a leader by having improved architecture capability. It'll help us understand the client problem better by having a better toolkit of knowledge. We can design much better solutions. Our architecture is focused on being more scalable. So one thing I personally found is when you go on the CTA journey, um, you start to focus more on the long term and you start to think more about things like data volume and how that impacts too. So the architecture which you start to define ends up naturally becoming more scalable and more resilient for the future too, because you start thinking about those things as well when you design architecture. And then lastly, when you have a good toolkit and knowledge of that toolkit, you're able to better leverage that full toolkit when you're serving a customer too. So for me, these are the 8 reasons why you should move towards this journey and you should look to improve your architecture capabilities as well. Now, if we touch upon CTA, why should we look to become a CTA? Well, these are the points that come to my mind. Firstly, as I mentioned, it allows you to have a real depth of Salesforce knowledge and understanding and wisdom, which naturally will let you better serve your customers too. Um, you can solve a client problem in the right way, I would say, when you have the right knowledge and principles in mind. You'll be recognized as an industry leader. So both externally and within the company you work for, you'll be the trusted advisor within that particular enterprise or for your customers. You'll be seen as a architecture leader. So people will come to you to ask you about delivery support or architecture advice and how to do things better. You can take or you have a responsibility to train and develop others in the ecosystem too. So I found a lot of CTAs, kind of like myself and others, we actually actively help other people grow in the ecosystem too, and that's something which we're passionate about. You can become one of the Salesforce elite, and then lastly, something on I would say a personal level to you guys is it definitely lets you command a good salary. So there's definitely an uplift which you'll get when you obtain this credential and it does open the doors for other opportunities. So I personally found that once I got my CTA, there was a lot more things open to me than would have been without having the CTA credential. And because you're one of the, I guess, 440, 450 people globally you have it, that number is still small considering this has been there for 10 years. Um, you definitely get, you definitely stand out as somebody special in the ecosystem. Now, one thing I do want to say, and this is a really personal point, is focus on the journey and not the outcome. So the CTA is about the learning part. It's about understanding. It's about diving deep. It's about gaining good knowledge. And with that, you can then serve a customer better through designing and delivering optimal solutions. So I'd always say keep your mind always focused on the learning part, making sure that depth is right, making sure you really understand the different domains that are there, and not leaving any like 1%, 2% unclear or ununderstood. That's what makes you a better architect. Like even before I passed CTA, when I studied and I had the knowledge, I really felt way more comfortable doing my job because I just thought, wow, I know this stuff now, and it's much easier for me to give the right advice because I've got this kind of body of knowledge or book of knowledge there with me that can help me. So really focus on that. That's a really important point. And I feel this more now because after having done CTA 4 years ago, um, Salesforce itself has moved on. A lot more things have come about. And if I don't keep myself up to speed, I kind of fall behind where I think, well, if I'm representing this credential, I also need to know the most recent things too. So this is why I always say that really keep your head on the journey. If you have learned things well, if you've diligently done the study, understood domains, and also then practice exam technique to pass through mock exams, you will get through the board. That's ultimately how it works. So this is the approach I would say anyone should take. In my mind, a true architect is one who has deep platform knowledge and is able to apply to client challenges. And like I said, I'm going to repeat this point again. This is not just a credential, but your approach to this whole process and journey is what actually makes you a CTA from a Salesforce perspective. So for me personally, how did my journey begin? Well, I started in 2013 There was a colleague in the company I worked for at that time, Acumen Solutions. I think he was amongst one of the first CTAs to get through. And just working with him, seeing what he knew about Salesforce, what he knew about architecture, how he was solving client problems, I thought, hey, this is something I definitely want to aspire to try and get to in the future. So that kind of got the firework lit, I guess, in my mind that at some point I do want to go upon this journey and learn it. So when I went to Cloud Sherpas, I sort of tried to get on the journey, but at that point in time, there wasn't much on Trailhead, which would guide you as to what things to learn. So in 2016, I think Salesforce made a shift here where Trailhead became publicly accessible for architecture learning. And at that point, I finally understood, okay, this is the stuff I need to learn and study. So I started going through that at Salesforce. They had their own internal academy as well, which was structured around you do the learning, but then you will get assessed per domain as well. So make sure you really know your stuff. In October 2017, I made my first attempt for review board, didn't get through, and I think rightly so. And then in May 2018, I got my head together again, went again for review board, and got through this time. And I think what really helped me is that I think I have to give thanks to a lot of the coaches which I had at Salesforce, two people in particular who are my direct coaches, but they definitely gave me a good push to get through the review board and help me get through as well. So what does it look like, or what did my journey look like? So I'd say it was a bit like this. 12 to 18 months was focused about domain learning. So learning the 9 different architecture domains which were there at that time. Sitting the domain case study exams which Salesforce had. So at the end of each domain, you had a case study which you have to sit and present back to a case study reviewer. And they basically assess whether you know your domain well or not. I also took time to build out examples because what you'll find is when you start doing study, you'll understand that for things like integration SSO, it's sometimes unlikely you've actually done a real example of it in your client project. So it's really important that when you get a chance, you do build out examples as well. When you get stuck on something or something is not clear in your mind, don't leave any niggling doubt. So always ask the question. So obviously we know we have Melissa Shepherd's group where questions can be asked. Maybe you know a CTA you can ask a question to, post it on LinkedIn, but make sure doubts are addressed. Don't go into the board with any doubts. It's extremely important. I think now I would tell people that yes, definitely join communities. There's a lot more study groups there, which compared to what was there before, it used to be pretty much you on your own. I think now it's it's like a group effort these days to get through. And the most important point in the learning part is when you're going through Trailhead content, absolutely create your own revision notes. So make your own short form notes that you can go back to when you start to get to the mock exam preparation for the review board. The last thing you want is when you're in the final 2, 3 months getting ready for board to be having to be rereading Trailhead material. It's like really detailed. It'll take you ages to get through. If you have your shorter form notes, it's much quicker to read that. It's in your own language, your own words, and you'll be able to revise that faster because it's really important to have all the Salesforce knowledge right to the top of your mind when you're in that review board preparation phase. So the way this worked for me at Salesforce is once I did this domain learning, I passed my domain exams. I then started preparing intensely for the board. So it was pretty much a set of 8 mock exams that I sat, which was examined by a CTA judge. The way the journey looked like, and it's probably it's interesting I should say this. I don't think I passed any of my mocks actually. In the first round of going for the board, I was getting better. I was improving, but I was always just either nearly there, slightly off, some bits missing. So it's it's okay to not have the best attempt on day one. Is the point I'm trying to make. It's a process, and it's an exam tuning or exam preparation process too, as you finally get towards the review board. So it's something important to keep in mind as you're doing mock exams. And the more mocks you do, the much more confident you'll become, and the more you'll fine tune your approach for the board as well, which I'll speak about as we go through. When you're doing mock exams, at the same period of time, you must be doing revision too. So revision for me is if you've created your domain notes, rereading, going through them, keeping them top of mind to make sure that all the facts are embedded in your head as you're going through mock preparation. There are 2 types of mocks, I would say. One is ones which you have somebody examine you. The other ones which you just do yourself. When I say do yourself, you solve yourself, present back to yourself. Which is still a mock in its own right, but at least it gives you a chance to do more presentation practice as well. Make sure you're doing things within time. And the core objective of this phase is you must nail your presentation approach. So if you know you're going to have A, B, and C type of slides that you're going to do, what are you going to draw in Lucid chart? What are you going to do on paper? What are you going to do in presentation? What will you write in the kind of Google Docs which you have to do for the board? Get those things nailed so you know exactly what approach you're going to take. You shouldn't be deciding that on the day. It should be like properly finalized. And then lastly, go forward for the final CCA review board at the very end of this. So this is what my journey looked like. And I think this gave me a good chance to be really prepared before going forward for the review board. So I'm probably going to repeat a few points here, but this is kind of what it looked like. When you're doing domain learning, as I said, create revision notes. You will end up with, I think now it's 10 sets of revision notes you'll end up with as you go through each domain. When you finish your revision areas, start doing your mock exams and doing as intensely as you can. I've heard of people these days who have actually sat 80 or 90 mocks, not examined. Maybe it might be 10, 15 examined, but at least 70 in themselves. I think if I was to look back at my study cadence, I probably had about 30, 40 that I did just on my own, presenting back to myself to improve, get better, get quicker at solving, and get more practice too. Um, Finalize early on, I would say, your presentation approach and structure, so you know how you're going to approach solving your mocks. Daily revision is extremely important to make sure things are top of mind. Um, Establishing a good slide template format that's easy for you guys to fill out when you're solving. Ask lots and lots of questions. So, like I said, do not leave an unknown area. Um, Practice solving with revised formats. So, what I mean here is when you're actually at the beginning, when you're trying to understand what your slide templates, your formats need to look like, try different things. What you'll find is you may be faster in some way, slower in some way. So figure out what works and what you're quicker at, which way you're quicker at doing things. Shorten your solutioning time. So figure out the right way to let you solve something faster. So what I found is by the time I was near the end and ready for board, I was only doing one pass through the scenario and no more. So it would basically I'd be solving as I go. So there are two ways to do it. You can either like kind of quick read, come back, or solve as you go. For me personally, I always felt solve as you go works better because you're kind of filling in the gaps as you're going along the case study and solving. From a study point of view, this might scare people, but this is actually really honest. You treat this as a university degree. I treated it that way, and that was the amount of study I had to give. So 20, 24 hours of study per week, it's not unheard of. I think you have to give that kind of time if you want to get through this exam and really give it the seriousness that it should be given as well. So top tips from me that I would say is open your mind to knowledge. Sometimes we think we know stuff and then you realize, don't think I do. So accept that you may not know certain things and that the knowledge will come as you go through the studying journey. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know about kind of sharing security settings, just hadn't had to do it too often on projects. So this gave me a good chance to dive into those areas as well. Second one is study in depth. So extremely important. Don't skimp on any area. If you are passing through a trailer thing and you think, okay, I sort of get it, but maybe 2%, 5% is not clear. Clear up that doubt. Just don't leave that there. So whilst the judges, I would say, are there in the board to help you get through, they can be like dogs with good noses. So they will smell something. If you're waffling in an area or it's clear that you're trying to say something which you perhaps don't know, um, it always will lead to a nice Q&A question. So clear those gaps while you can. Don't go into the board with the knowledge of a gap. Make sure you close those things out. Give yourself 20 to 25 hours of free time each week to study. I think that's really important. So I would say is either early morning or evening, keep it aside for study. Check with your family and your partners if you're going to be able to do this as well. I think that's really important to make sure the whole family is on board when you're doing this. And what I would say is the weekends, you'll have to sacrifice some weekend time, obviously, towards this too. So that's when the bulky study will probably likely happen. This might be company dependent, but I would really say try to take on, or try if you can, for the final 6 months leading up to the board, see if you can have slightly easier projects to do. I felt this really helped because it gave me more study time. It gave me more headspace as well to be able to be properly prepared for the board. So try and bring this up to your employer. Make sure that you can try and be put on slightly easier accounts. Maybe you cut down to 4 days a week or something like that to try and make sure the balance is okay for you to study as well. Experience is extremely important. I'd say nothing beats this. If you can be on a project which lets you experience a domain that you've not touched before, awesome, because then you can kill two birds with one stone. So think through what you don't know. And then when you come to speaking up to your management about you wanting to go for CTA, you can then try and see if you can get projects that will touch upon experiences that you've not done before. Practical practice is also important. So you want to start to try building things out in your own org. So for example, building Salesforce to Salesforce single sign-on, building integration to publicly available APIs, that kind of stuff you should do because then you'll understand like nitty-gritty how it works. One area which I would also bring up is things like Salesforce DX, for example. A lot of people I've heard come up with very templated solutions for DevOps and governance. And yeah, fine, it'll work ultimately. But if you ask a question on it, you'll fall apart. So it's better to know the detail, know how to do something. And if you've really done something hands-on, it's just so much easier to talk about on the board. So don't skimp on anything practical, which will help you really cement your knowledge. Revise, repeat, revise, repeat. Muscle memory is what will save your skin on the day by having your facts and your knowledge of the platform top of mind. So muscle memory is very important here. Now, much more than I'd say now compared to before, is join public study groups, ask questions, and work with other people who are studying too, because I've seen a lot of good communication happening in some of the study groups which are there. And it's definitely good to join these things to help you go further. Find a CTA mentor. So if you're fortunate enough to have a friend or know somebody who's a CTA who's willing to kind of coach you, guide you, it's always good to have somebody you can maybe reach out to for a question or something. This helped me a lot at Salesforce. So a couple of people were there that I was, along with my own manager at the time, who was a CTA, just to fire some questions to when you come stuck on something, and they use their wisdom and knowledge to give you an answer. That really helped. Um, for those who want extra support, as some of you guys may know, I run a CCA Academy externally. We're kind of, wouldn't say, we do a slightly different approach to Flow Republic, but we're the kind of the two people who are out there who offer this kind of coaching. So I'll speak a few words about that at the end of the presentation too. So you can look to join a coaching academy as well. Number 11 is also important. So when you start having the knowledge, embody the CTA that you want to be. So when you are standing in front of a customer, you're presenting an architecture, feel yourself as a CTA when you start to do so, because that preparation will help you very nicely on the board. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I was given is that the CTAs who are in the room as your judges should feel that if they were ill and they could not do a project anymore, and you had to be brought in, they'd be happy to swap you in without even thinking about it. You want to give that confidence to the CTA judges which are there. Point 12 is also really key. If you smash the presentation in the review board, I think that sets you up very nicely for the Q&A. So a good presentation will give confidence in the judges that this person looks like, sounds like, feels like he knows what he's talking about. So always try and deliver a very good, compelling presentation. It makes your Q&A round a lot easier. So for example, I think in my case, when I went for the second review board, I was much more sure about my solution, and that reflected in how I presented. And at the same time, there were things which I knew were sound. So, for example, the sharing architecture which I'd come up with for the particular scenario, I got no questions on it from the review board on that day. And that just ultimately let me know that, fine, you've either it's horribly wrong, which I knew it was not, or you've absolutely nailed it, which is why no one's cross-questioning you in that area. And that's always a very good spot to be. So, practice, practice, practice presenting and being more confident in presenting too, and feeling like you're a CCA inside when you present. And then lastly is about kind of how you handle Q&A. I think it's a fine balance between over defending your solution and over adjusting your solution. It's a fine line between the two. So I would say where you feel you're right, and if you feel it's backed up by your knowledge of the platform, stand your ground. But at the same time, if you feel during Q&A that they're trying to push you or move you towards a solution that might be more optimal, then be willing to make that change as well. So that's the fine line that I say you have to play that game nicely when you're in the board. And what I'd also say about Q&A is the judges are kind of there to help you. It's not about deliberately cross questioning. It's about them also understanding your rationale as to why you made certain choices. So I'll give you an example from my board. And this was kind of an interesting one. It was around the use of a standard approach to doing something versus a custom approach. And ultimately, I felt from my own experience and opinion, that a custom approach was better for that particular scenario than something standard. And I thought, fine, I'm going to stick with that. And I'll give my reasons for saying why that is the case. So that helped because at least the judges then understood that, fine, he's not just arbitrarily said, yeah, custom, whatever. He's genuinely given his 3 or 4 reasons why, in his own head, he thought this was actually a better way of doing something. And that's fine. This is how you have to defend when you've gone down. a certain route. So for those who don't know, what does a review board format look like? So it's changed obviously since my time. Things used to be all in person back then. Now it's all virtual. As far as my understanding, it may change in the future. You have 3 hours to solve your case study. I would say it's really important to use that time wisely. Keep your head in the zone. Make sure you slept well. Make sure you've booked a time which is comfortable for you as well, in terms of the actual solving of the case study. Keep away from distractions. Just stay in the zone, as I'd say. You then get a 15-minute break, and I use the word break loosely here because it's not really a break. You're using that time to maybe iron out some areas which were maybe iffy in the case study, to think about how you might speak about something, or something which you might want to tweak or change. It does happen during the break. You then have, after the break, a 45-minute, I should say, I skipped the line here. There's a 45-minute presentation, obviously. Again, after which you'll have a little break, and then you have 45 minutes of Q&A as well once the presentation is done. And then I think it's roughly 2 to 3 weeks from there, you'll get the results. So the waiting time for the results is also, yeah, it's interesting because you kind of just want to hear after years of preparation, just want to know today that what's the outcome. But yeah, you do have to wait to get the final results come through. So for someone like me who went to the board twice, like what did I change between attempt one and two? This is kind of key, interesting to see. So the first thing that did was I went through all the Trailhead content again, and I deepened my revision notes. So anything which was loose, ununderstood, open areas, maybe Salesforce you release something, I made sure I was deepening my revision notes to make sure that fine, I've got a much more deeper base of knowledge than the first time. I recognized some learning gaps from the first attempt. So there are things like Salesforce Files Connect, just hadn't covered it in my first attempt at all. So those things I made sure I covered off, and had deeper knowledge of those things, which allowed me to then solve using those areas as well. It gave me a chance to build new knowledge across Salesforce product areas also. So I made sure I wasn't just focusing on Salesforce, looking at things like Tableau CRM, Marketing Cloud, CPQ, not deep understanding, but at least basic to mid, to make sure I can justify when to recommend that in a particular problem. I revised my presentation approach. This was probably one of the biggest things I did. So instead of doing what I did the first time, which was all paper, I went to paper plus PowerPoint, and I found myself being a lot faster at typing, a lot neater. So it made sure that mistakes were kind of gone. It just made it much easier for me to do. I then practice solving with this new presentation approach, which I was much quicker at doing. And I did a lot more repeated mock practice too. So obviously I didn't have, like, I think today in the community, you must have about probably 25, 30, maybe 40 mock exams, which are there made by different people. I only had access to whatever was there at Salesforce. That was about, I think at that time it was about 7 or 8. So it was a case of repeating, getting better, getting quicker, and then making sure that the approach to solving is like nailed in my head. What was interesting though about board attempt two, I would say, is that from the mocks you practiced, there's always a curveball that comes in. There's always like a requirement, be that a process requirement or an integration requirement that you think, wow, haven't seen this one before. So what I would say is not everything on the review board that you'll get is going to be 100% familiar. You will no doubt be struck by something which you think, oh crap, this is unfamiliar. What do I do? And that's fine. It's really important not to panic. And what I said to myself is when I went for the board temp number two, in the first 5 minutes, I was just like, crap, how am I actually going to get through this? Because there's a new industry, hadn't come across it before, hadn't thought about how Salesforce could be solved for this particular area, and I was just like, I'm going to struggle here. And then I said to myself, no, look, you've done all the mock practice that you could have done. You've built all the depth of knowledge across Salesforce that you could have done in the time that you had. Keep a cool mind, take a deep breath, and just focus on solving it. Forget about what outcome you're going to get. Pass or fail, forget about it. Just focus on solving it on what you know and get through. That's it. And that's what I did. And ultimately that got me through. So if you find those jitters come when you're doing your review board, just keep what I said in mind there. That, cool yourself down, just focus on the doing part and get yourself through it. So the last piece I wanted to speak about before I open up to any questions is the CTA Academy that I run. Just wanted to say a few words about that, how it's structured, and if anyone's wanting to hear more, then feel free to get in touch with me afterwards. I offered basically two programs. One is catered for those who are wanting to firstly learn the Salesforce domains, get through domain assessments which I run, and want to then go through a set of mock exams as well as part of preparation and coaching for the final review board. So I run that as a CTA full program. This is the one that I think I've really enjoyed doing because the candidates who are part of this one, I've got a few people who are part of this particular program. I can really see the learning being deep for them. The way I've tried to structure and write these domain exams, it makes sure that they're really made to learn the knowledge. They cannot just get away without knowing something. And I'm also able to then assess what they don't know. So it properly coaches them to make sure that the depth of knowledge is there before they even start to think about doing mock exams. Um, I then coach them on an approach they can use to try and do the presentation. So it's not, I wouldn't call it a template because it's not, but it's more a kind of approach that you can take. And it's up to the candidate whether they want to use that or not, or do it in a different way. They have to tailor it for themselves. So that's one thing which I do as well. I also coach people for their review board evaluation. So obviously something that's different now is it's two-step. You have the review board evaluation to pass, and then after that you go for the final review board exam. So I give people specific coaching to help them get through the review board evaluation as well and how to approach solving a shorter form scenario. We have ad hoc deep dive sessions. So quite often I ask my candidates, what is an area that commonly we're struggling with or we don't know? And then I arrange a session. We go through to speak about that particular area and make sure everyone's gaps in the community is closed off. I have a Slack channel, which is where the people in my community kind of speak, discuss, raise points. I also try to every so often encourage some discussion in a particular technical topic to get people talking. And that's quite important to get just people's brains thinking about architecture and how to solve certain things. And lastly, I do one mock with an external CCA course. So I always find that it's fine hearing my voice, but I think you need to hear from somebody else, maybe more recent than me, who's got through the board. So we always do one mock with an external person as well. There's a more recent pass for the review board to give a different kind of feedback as well. That's that. I also do a mock only program, and this is tailored more for those who have already passed the review board evaluation or have done one attempt before for the review board, but just want to go through a set of mock exams, get maybe a different form of presentation coaching from me, and be part of a community to go forward for the review board. So this is the second program which I offer, which is, again, it's for people who are further advanced, who are basically review board ready, but they want to have a different program on their way through. These are the two which I basically offer. And from a timeline perspective, kind of how does it work? So I've tried to mirror my own timeline because I think that was representative of what it takes to get through. So it looks like the following, where you have 12 months of deep, intense learning, where you're learning your domains, you're having sessions with me in terms of catch-ups, Q&A, making sure that your knowledge is sound. We then start to do the real board preparation, where you go through mock exams. We get you ready for the review board evaluation, get you through it, and then start prepping you for the final review board, and then you appear for the final report exam. So we're talking somewhere, it depends on per individual, how quickly you do the learning part. I think that drives everything. But we're looking at, I would say, 18 months to 2.5 years, depending on how aggressive, what you know already, I guess, and then how much time you're giving towards the learning elements of the CTA program. Cool. And the last thing I want to touch upon is the following. So what are the actual benefits of doing this and joining an academy? So I would say firstly, you get access to me. I've been in the ecosystem for 14 years, done a few different things, and you get somebody who's kind of come through Salesforce's own way of coaching and something I definitely help you guys with. Um, I've made my own case studies which are not in the public domain, which is actually interesting because then you won't, at least you won't have solved them before, be something new. We have our own 10 different domain assessments that I formed. So that's something which lets me ensure and lets you ensure as well that your knowledge is sound in the different areas. I do one-to-one coaching. So basically your sessions are with me. It's not as part of a group, but it's basically with myself. And we're the only provider who offers this kind of domain-based learning route. So I like to focus more on the learning part. It's not about exam technique and mock exam. That is part of it, right? That's part of what we do. But my goal is to make you a better architect, first and foremost, before we even think about going forward to CTA. So if I can make you better at the job you do and make you a more qualified architect, I feel that the battle is won. And then we get you mock ready. Through mock exams, you get ready for the final review board. Cool. So that's the end of what I had to share today. I'd like to open up to any questions that you guys may have.
Thanks, Mitesh. It was nice. Thanks for a very detailed explanation on your journey and what is involved in this process. Thanks. Let's go to some of the questions. Okay, first one is for a CTA full program. I think this is referring to your program. Is it required to
Okay.
become a solution architect?
Um, okay, I guess you probably got the question in text, but I would say that you're naturally going to become one anyways, because when you start to take on roles that take you above doing development work, you start to think about how different Salesforce products, how different Salesforce features can be used to solve a client problem. So naturally, you become a solution architect through doing that. So I probably fluffed the question here, but my point is yes, I think you do ultimately become definitely at least a solution architect as you're part of this journey.
Hmm. And are there any prerequisites for your program to join? Like,
Not really, no. So I initially used to think, fine, I'll take people on who are system and application architect qualified. But since I've seen people who have done those and still maybe don't know certain areas, it's either I just want people who are willing to learn, want to go on the journey. If it takes them longer, that's fine, not a problem. But I just want to help them grow better as an architect. So yeah, there's no prerequisites in that regards.
okay, thanks. Then another question is for the CTA itself. Do we need to have any minimum years of experience required? From Salesforce side, it's not required, but what is your recommendation? Like, do you see anything like that?
Okay, so from my personal experience, I started in 2009 doing Salesforce. I passed it in 2018. So that's basically 9 years. Um, I could have passed it maybe a year or two earlier if I'd have really begun studying a year earlier, but I think I would have said between 5 to 7 years of experience on the platform is probably the sweet spot to get through. Having said that, don't hold my words as gospel here. I've heard of candidates who have passed through, who are fresh graduates from university who have finished in 3 years. So it's not to say that it can't be done, but what I will say is that there's a marked difference between a CCA with experience and a CCA who may have gone through the academic route. There is a difference. And I always think that the balance has to be there between how much you've learned from projects and experience that you've done and how much you're supplementing that knowledge with your CTA training and learning what you're doing on top. And I think it has to be a balance for you to really represent CTA as best as possible. So I think I would have said kind of 5 to 7 years, I think is a good time to grow your career as well, from developer to architect to doing things like pre-sales architecture as well. And that's the right point to then think about the CTA journey when you are actually doing architecture work.
Hmm. Okay. Another question is, should the presentation be more graphical and catchy for the mock?
No, no. You want to save time. So it's really important. The main thing is that it should be clear and succinct, and it should be quick for you to put it together. So it's not about how cool your presentation is. Like if you look at most candidates who present for a review board, you basically got white slides with just text on them and images. That's it, and tables. Let's say that's as far as people go. You don't want just make sure your things are neat, but you don't need to have kind of eye-catching slides. You're not being examined for that. You're being examined for your technical content.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Do we need any strong business knowledge in various industries in order to pass the exam?
It helps. It certainly helps. So, what I've been encouraging my guys to do is try to read up on the Salesforce industry data models because the more the more knowledge you have about different industries in general, if a case study comes up which is for that particular industry, you won't be frazzled. You actually might even have some solution ideas in your head as to how something can be solved. So when you start seeing terms, this is one thing that I found was sometimes hard in the board. The way things are mentioned, like some of the bullet points for a particular industry, there might be a term that they use which you just like, I don't really understand this. But if you're fortunate enough to have either worked in that space before or have come across it before somehow, it makes your life a little bit easier because you understand the concept. So what I would tell guys now who are going forward board is like SF industries, just read up data models for those areas. At least you understand like kind of challenges, problems, and what solution frameworks can look like for different industries which are there.
Okay, got it. And couple of questions on your program again. Any programs, CD Academy, Academy programs available in India? Are you aware of any?
Well, I would say that I'm probably the closest to India that there is now. in terms of academy. So I'm based in Thailand, so I'm not that far from India. I'm not sure how the Republic structure their one, but yeah, I'm certainly trying to cover this Asian time zone while I'm here. So helping out kind of ANZ and the India region too. So yeah, guys, if you're interested, reach out to me. Happy to help out where I can.
Okay, and can you drop the link to your program? I think few needs access to that.
Okay, I'll just put it in the chat. So
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, yeah, if anyone's keen, then just either reach out to me on LinkedIn or if you go on the website, there's a form you can fill out, and I'll get your details. And what I normally do is I set up a one-on-one call with you guys because this is not about me, and it's ultimately something that we have to click. So between myself and you as a candidate, if you feel happy for me to coach you and you're happy to work with someone like me as a coach, that's when we move forward. So I always think that it's really important to have that initial call with me. You guys can then decide if you think the dynamic works or not. We move forward from that.
Okay. Next, for CTA, Salesforce mentioned certain required certifications. Rather than that, any other certifications do you suggest apart from those?
Baseline five. So when I joined Salesforce, I think they were quite apt in making sure that most of the delivery people had to sit a baseline five certificates. I think for anybody in CTA, before you even go on the architecture route, these five I would also do. So it's basically admin, um, platform app builder, sales cloud, service cloud, and advanced admin. I would definitely knock off those five for sure. It just makes sure that your core platform knowledge will be strong by doing that before you start going down the architecture route. So I do those five.
Okay, nice. And another question is, how much knowledge should we have on the related products like Marketing Cloud or Tableau or any other clouds other than core?
It's it's a good question. And I think I've been asked a lot more about this recently as well. So what I'd say is be aware of the basic capabilities that Marketing Cloud can do. So for example, you need to know if Marketing Cloud can send emails, send SMS, kind of read social posts. This kind of stuff you need to know the baseline answers to because in this CTA, what we're looking for is they want you to be able to recommend a tool when it's needed and not recommend it unnecessarily. This is kind of an important point. Likewise, Tableau CRM. So be aware of what specific use cases would make you need to use Tableau CRM and be aware of what it's actually used for. So, if you have a large data volume scenario, should you use Salesforce reports or should you consider using an external BI tool or Tableau CRM in that example? I'll pick up on TCRM and say my revision notes contain for that area. So I firstly knew about kind of lenses, data sets, how you would need to think about building something in Tableau CRM. More importantly than that, I focused my time on understanding how do you actually get data from either Salesforce or external systems into Tableau CRM. What are your options? That is important to know. And also another point is quite key is if you're going to use something like TCRM and you want to control things like security and sharing and those kind of things, then just be aware of um, what Salesforce data flows will let you do and how security settings in Salesforce core that applied across through something called security predicates in Tableau CRM. That kind of knowledge you should have to be able to defend yourself effectively. The other area I would also probably speak about here is things like CPQ. So you don't need to know the ins and outs of how CPQ works. It's not required, but you need to know which parts of the CPQ data model tie back into the Salesforce core data model, which core objects are leveraged as part of the CPQ. So that kind of linkage area or crossover area, you must understand. And more so than anything, the judges want to know that you're recommending a product for the right reason. So just because you see the word bundling somewhere, if it's simple bundling, you may not need CPQ. You may build a custom build it. But if you think that, oh, I'm reading these requirements, this is complicated stuff, how it's bundled together, at that point you recommend CPQ. So you should know when to recommend something and when not to. So having a bit of basic knowledge about what product offers makes it easier for them to make the recommendation.
Thanks for that. Uh, Another, we've got a few more questions here. Um, can you explain use of completing Salesforce certification? Like, how important is it? I am not sure what the question is. What's purpose of completing Salesforce certification?
Okay, so two things. Number one is it validates to external people, your company, your employers, your clients, that you know what you know. So that is one of the important reasons why you go through the certification process. It makes sure, obviously, because of the way the questions come, it makes sure that you have a decent enough understanding of that particular domain. And like I mentioned, that is your baseline, which you have to do anyways. On top of that, when you start joining an academy like ours, and you start to do domain assessments, you're taking your baseline things that you've read and you're filling all the gaps around it to make sure that your knowledge really is sound. So that's kind of how I would think about it from a learning perspective.
Got it. Two questions on similar topic. Should we know about the budgets and the cost while we do the solutioning for the mock exam? Yeah.
No, not needed. So Salesforce doesn't ask you in the review board pricing, or they want you to recommend an optimal solution from a technical point of view. It's not about it's not about pricing and trying to find a customer a cheaper alternative, no, but it's about recommending the right thing. So in the review board, don't worry about cost. It's not examined. But having said that, one important point I will say, um, don't unnecessarily recommend something. So for example, I've seen a lot of times in the past where people were just being safe and recommending. They see somebody, part of a case study will say like they're kind of fulfilling like a partner kind of role, and they started saying, okay, partner community license, not necessary. Customer community plus might give them the access to the objects which they need access to. Maybe they don't need access to lead opportunity campaigns, etc. So recommend the right thing for the problem you're solving. Don't unnecessarily go overkill when it's not required.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. But licensing, we still need to know, right? Like to suggest which.
Licensing, you absolutely
Yeah.
need to know. So you need to have your nail on, and this is a really important one. You have to have your nail on the head as to why you're recommending a license. So you need to know the objects that the license grants access to, or the capabilities the license grants access to, when you're putting a recommendation down. So that's extremely important to know when to recommend a certain license type. So again, my same point is valid here. Don't over recommend something, or they don't require something. Go for the right thing or what they want to try and do.
Got it. Another question: is coding knowledge required to become CTA? And do you
No,
need to code on that day during the exam, or is it only solution?
no, we've got people who pass the CCA don't know how to write code. So no, coding is not required. But what I'd say is important is you have to know the platform trade-off as to when code would need to be written. So for example, if you get a certain requirement, you need to have the knowledge to know whether something should be solved by a Salesforce flow, whether it needs to be batch Apex, whether it needs to be solved by a trigger. And if you're recommending a trigger, you must know what are the implications of using a trigger. It should be bulkified. How many invocation? If it's not bulkified, what are the implications which are going to happen? What are so-called limits you can run into? Those governance topics related to code, you have to be very clear on. That's stuff you have to know. But do you need to be an expert in writing code? No, that's not examined, and nothing. I'm yet to come across somebody who's told me that they've been asked to even speak about pseudocode in an exam now. It's not required. But know when something should be code versus a declaration.
Okay, thanks. I think we're getting to last two more questions. Do you suggest any resources for preparation for CTA?
Yeah. A few I'll call out. So Tamim Bari's book. I think some of you guys will have heard of that. The book that I think he's launched a new edition for that. So that's good. I've heard from a few people that that's actually a nice kind of book of learning to take on. So that's always an extra help as well, given it's in the public domain. The next thing I would say is the Trailhead modules are your starting point. That is the stuff you have to absolutely go through and go through in detail. So Salesforce obviously have published their architecture learning paths, and for the 10 domains, they've created Trailhead badges, super badges, whatever you call them, which you have to get through as part of that journey. So that stuff, do not miss something in there. Do all of it. That's your absolute must. Because I use that for my revision. You use that for yours. And what I would say is when you start coming across gaps of things which are not explained well in trailer, you don't understand, Ask questions, go external, do your own research, and try and fill those gaps too, to make sure your understanding is sound. But that is your starting point for knowledge. And the other thing I would say is that in the public domain, there's a lot more case studies out there. So when you start having your domain knowledge good, you can start solving CTA case studies and seeing how you are doing so. And one thing I would also call out to you guys is that I think the best case study I've seen so far to date is probably Megaprint. So some of you guys may be aware of Megaprint. It was released by Salesforce recently, I think in the last year or year and a half. That's pretty close to what the board is like. So, if you want to get a taster of what it's like to sit on the board and solve something, I'd recommend giving that one a try. And even somebody like me, CTA, we've been doing this for a few years. Wasn't easy. So this is why I say this is a very good one to do.
Okay. So what was the first one that you mentioned? I think people didn't catch it here.
Tamim Bari has a book. So along with your Trailhead, I would say that once you finish your own Trailhead domain learning, it's worthwhile doing a little supplement with the book he's produced.
Okay. Okay. Uh, I'll put the links later. I think they're asking for links. I don't have the links at the moment. Mm,
Okay.
can you please share the challenges you faced during the journey?
Okay, challenges. I think when you fail an exam, right? So I personally, I'd never failed anything before. Interviews, exams, I've always got through, cleared it, and cleared it really nicely. So it's the first time in my life I'd failed something. I was like, holy shit, how do I handle this? So it's really important to not get down. Please understand, and it's a very important point I'll say is that majority of CTAs have not passed in the first attempt. Just remember that fact. Most people have gone through at least once to get through. I've also heard of people who've gone through six, 7 times to eventually pass. So just keep that in the back of your minds. That does not mean you rest on your laurels and don't make a good attempt. That's not what I'm saying. You absolutely should smash it each time you go forward for the board. But if you don't get through, don't get disheartened. It's really important to regroup, understand where you may have gone wrong. So be very honest with yourself as to where you've gone wrong. Take your time to close off your knowledge gaps, improve your knowledge, improve your solving approach, try doing something differently, and then go forward for the review board again. So that's something that for me was a challenge actually getting myself ready the second time. I said to myself, stay positive, learn more, expand your knowledge more, and be much better prepared the second time. And that approach really, really helped me. The second challenge, I covered this a little earlier, but it's about unfamiliarity when the scenario comes up. You likely are going to face this when you get into the review board. You're going to be like, not come across this before. How to handle it? Stay calm, stay cool. And as I mentioned, forget about the outcome you're going to get. Forget about the pass or fail. Focus on just the process and solving with a calm mind. And I always believe if you put the hard work and energy behind doing something, the success will come. And believe in yourself when you're sitting there and solving the exam. And the last challenge I say is time. So make sure that in your lives you have a 2 year window where you can be committed to that kind of study cadence, right? And if you have a supportive partner, a family who can be behind you throughout all this, that really helps making sure that you can get through as well. So just make sure that it's not just you, but your family are also on board with your study commitments that you're gonna have to make because it's sacrifice not just for you, but for your family as well at the same time. Cool. Any more questions?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, there's one last question. Would working with Salesforce be any advantages if you want to become a CTA, like directly working with Salesforce?
It depends. It depends. So I do know that Salesforce obviously have their own in-house academy, but as far as I'm aware, it's not for your access to it. It depends on your role that you're doing. I think that's the case. I don't want to speak on Salesforce's behalf. I don't know, but that may be the case. So yes, so maybe the one advantage I would say you have is you can build a good network of CTAs because Salesforce, I think even now, have the most number of CTAs globally employed within their organization. So yes, you have access to them and their knowledge and reaching out to them. But whether you know them or not, a lot will depend on what role you have in Salesforce. So for me, as a program architect, I was directly linked to a lot of the CTAs that I can ask a question to. If you're part of like an application support team, you will probably not have that network to be able to do that. So I think that also depends which role you're in.
Okay. I think we have one final question. This is regarding notes. So, does it make any difference writing notes on Notepad versus using tools like OneNote?
I'm assuming this is for revision notes. So I use Google Drive,
Yeah.
and I use Google Drive because I could, if I was traveling into London that time when I was doing my exam and studying and so on. So I could study on the go. If I was using Drive, then access it on your phone, read it anywhere. You're not restricted to just having a laptop available. So I would say use Drive for your notes. That helped me.
Thanks. Uh, for the let's say for the second attempt, do you need to retake the entire exam or only the parts? That is it like partial?
Depends. Depends. So if you failed multiple sections, you'll you'll have to retake the whole lot. So it becomes like a full exam. If you have partially passed, you've passed majority, but might have failed at one or two domains. In that case, you are given like a section retake exam, which is slightly smaller than the main one. You still have to holistically make a solution that works across all domains, but the judges will spend more of the time examining the areas that you failed. So that's how the retake situation works.
Mhm. And what would be the certification cost for that one for retakes?
Uh, I don't know actually. I don't want to give a number that I'm not sure of. So
Okay,
back in my time, it used to be 6K for the first one,
first one, yes.
first attempt, and it might have been somewhere between two or three for retake, but I don't know what the costing is now, so I don't want to give false information.
Okay, I think that's all we have got. Any other questions? No, but thanks a lot, Mitesh. Uh, and I think we just need to give the resources once again to everyone. Maybe I'll reach out to you and put it in the in our group. Or if you have time now, if you have those links ready, can you just pass it here or put it in the chat? If not, yeah.
Yeah, I put my own one in there, so you guys can click on that, and that'll take you through to the Academy link, so you can see what is there. I'm just trying to see if I have the Trailhead one handy, which is the where you start to learn. Let me just see if I can find that. It's CTA. I think it's this one here. Hold on. So, um, okay, this one here. This should be your starting point. I'm putting it in the chat. There. That's where the Trailhead stuff begins for the different domains.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mitesh, for your time and going through all these
No,
questions.
thank you for letting me present. And what I'll just as a closing note from what I'd like to say is that I'm for the next year, at least I'm definitely based out in ASEAN. So anybody in Singapore, Thailand, this region, India as well. You want to go on CTA, you want somebody local in the same time zone, then get in touch. Hopefully I can help you.
Okay, that's all, guys. See you in another session in another month. Thanks a lot.
Well,
Nice,
thank you. Take
nice
care.
session.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.